The Lord had given rest to Israel from all their surrounding enemies, and Joshua was old and well advanced in years. And Joshua gathered all the tribes of Israel to Shechem and summoned all the elders, the heads, the judges, the officers of Israel. And standing before all the people who had come to present themselves before God, Joshua's voice thundered, "Choose you this day whom you will serve, whether it be the gods your fathers served in the region beyond the river, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you dwell. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." You know you have that verse needle-pointed somewhere in your house. When it's time for a choosing, the right answer is to choose the Lord. You know, growing up, I enjoyed those choose-your-own adventure books. Remember those? You get to a cave. If you want to go in the cave, turn to page 21. If you'd like to go past the cave and look for something else, turn to page 35. It was a picture of, for me, boyhood life, where you get to choose your own adventure every day. Video games were similar, only this time you could choose your own identity. For those of you who are my age or older, this is Mario Kart. For those of you who are much younger than me, this is what video games used to look like. And you could pick your own avatar. You could choose who you wanted to be today. You could be Mario. You could be Luigi. You could be Bowser. You could be a pretty princess named Peach. Don't judge me. You could be whatever you want for that moment. Who knew that it would one day simulate real life? You know, in our secular world today, we are encouraged to choose our own adventure and choose our own identity. We have a deep need to know who am I, to define ourselves, and in the face of a paralyzing number of choices, we tend to make it up as we go along or choose from our gut instinct. But hasn't trial and error proven that leads nowhere? I mean, trying to be master and commander of ourselves, trying to be the one who captains our own soul, has proven disastrous. In the words of Scripture, each has turned to his own way. We've all gone astray. The heart is deceitful above all things. We don't know what we need, and we don't know where to go. But Christians have long claimed that we know the antidote. Choose Christ. Let him have his way with you. Let him give you an identity. Let him chart your course. Let him choose your adventure. And so, many of us were baptized. And the last time that we needed to be told to choose, we think, was when we went under the water. We look back on that day as our day of choosing. And then for the rest of our lives, we come to church and we're reminded of that day that we escaped danger, that day we chose right. Well, this morning I would like us to rethink that just a little bit. What exactly did we choose on that day? Whose identity did we accept on that day? But whose adventure are we really living today? We assume that a time for choosing is for the lost. But it just may be that today, the saved need some saving. How do we Christians traditionally, usually, generally, define ourselves? How do we tend to find our identity? Well, generally, there are 4 ways that we do it, and it's not new. The first is that I know who I am because I know the right things I do. Maybe I give every single Sunday. Maybe I fast twice a year. The strength of this approach is that there really are good and right things to do as Jesus commands. The weakness, of course, is that when this is how we define our identity, it leads to self-righteous pride. We find our identity in ourselves. The good that I do. We don't sing, "Nothing in my hands I bring." We sing, "Look at what is in my hands." Paul talks about this in Philippians. Do you remember this list that Paul gives of eyes? Paul says, if you want to make your list, I guarantee you mine is longer and richer. I was born of the tribe of Benjamin, Hebrew of Hebrews. I went through all those Bet Safers and Bet Midrash. When it comes to the law, I was blameless, better than all the people my age and more. He said, make your list, mine's longer. And then he said, but everything on my list is useless. And I treat it as rubbish, as dung, as refuse, as what I put out on Monday morning for the trash man to pick up. The second way that we often define who I know who I am, is by listing the wrong things I avoid. Maybe it's not my long list of right things I do, but I can tell you the things I don't do. And that's how I know who I am. I don't smoke, I don't chew, I don't go with girls that do. The strength of this approach is that there are wrong things we should avoid as Jesus commands. The weakness, of course, is that when this is how we define our identity, it leads to a different kind of self-righteousness. It's called self-righteous fear. Paul says in Colossians chapter 2 that any religion that can be defined as I don't touch, I don't taste, I don't handle is powerless to change the heart. Do you realize both pride and fear can constrain the heart, but they have no power to change the heart? Paul says what you really desire is what God really wants. And learning to say no to the things you desire may be step one. But if that's your definition of religion, you haven't changed who you are. Number 3, the third way we traditionally seek to define ourselves is by belonging to the right group. I found the people believe the right things, do the right things, and call themselves by the right terms. Now, the strength of this approach is that God does call us to be together, to worship together, to serve as local congregations, and to worship and serve as He commands. The weakness, of course, is that when we define ourselves by this, we know who we are because I know which group I'm in. It quickly gives way to what we call group think. We in our group have always held view X. So I can't change my position. My brethren over there, if they were to hear that I changed my view on that, might think I'm not in that group anymore. But you see, that's not possible because I'm in the right group. We know who we are because we're in the right group. To change our minds might put us in a different group, and that'd be the wrong group. I can't be in the wrong group because I'm in the right group. It stifles creative thinking, the freedom to follow the truth wherever you find it. It makes our spiritual parents more of an authority than the Spirit that leads us. And the right group to which I belong is still using the operative word I. Jesus faced some people who struggled with this sense of identity. In John chapter 8, He tries to get them to see things differently than they thought, different than their parents thought, different than their parents' taught them to think. And their response was, we are Abraham's seed. We're of the right stock. We belong to the right group. We know who we are because of who we belong to. And Jesus said, are you kidding? God could from these stones raise up children to Abraham. I want you to believe and follow the truth wherever it goes. It's a challenge to groupthink. The fourth way that we usually seek to identify ourselves is by saying, all right, it may not be the list of right things I do or the wrong things I avoid or even being in the right group, but at least I'm not in a wrong group. This is where you might hear the phrase brotherhood and say that's everybody who's just like me. And if anybody's a little different than me, they're out there in the world. You know, some of the major voices of the Restoration movement saw the problem with this. David Lipscomb said, you know, it's very good to fight sectarianism. I'm for that. And then he said, I feel like I'm surrounded by people who are anti-sectarian sectarians. That is, they've determined that who they are is that I know who I am because I can name all the groups I'm not. But if the church is one, and the church contains all the saved, and there are people all over the world who come to Jesus without checking with me or calling Harding to make sure they're on the right list, then there are Christians in places of which I'm not aware. And there are people who think like me, act like me, do like me, but are wrong on something. And if I think God somehow can work with that, why am I so ungracious as to assume he isn't doing that other places? The idea that I know my identity because of which group I'm not in is not only unhealthy, but it's another way of identifying myself by myself. Some of Jesus' followers struggled with this. Jesus gave them power to heal and to do miracles. And they were out traveling and they saw some people who were doing the very same thing in Jesus' name, but they didn't know them. And so the apostles come to Jesus and they say, we found these people who were doing good things in your name, but they weren't one of us. And so I told them to cut it out. Quit doing good things in the name of Jesus if you didn't check with us first. And Jesus says, leave them alone. Whoever is not against us is for us. It was hard for them. It's hard for me. It's hard for us. The four traditional ways of expressing our identity are basically this. Look at where I stand on all the right stuff or the wrong stuff. And these four approaches, rooted in something good, can lead to pride or fear or groupthink or sectarianism. And all of these offer lifeless formalism when Christ came to offer the abundant life. On the screen, I want you to take a look at a cruise ship. I want you to look carefully at the luxurious penthouse suite, at the ornate first-class rooms. I mean, there's even this long, beautiful, descending staircase with some fine artwork that leads to the dining area. And what awaits you at the dining area? Oh, first course, fresh oysters, followed by soup. This is followed by roasted salmon and cucumbers. We're only halfway through. Then comes the filet mignon, followed by lamb with mint sauce. There were 10 courses. The last course, ice cream with chocolate eclairs. Getting hungry? Wouldn't you love to book your place on this ship? Look at where they stay. Look at what they eat. Imagine where they don't stay. Imagine what they don't eat. If you were looking for all this life had to offer, could you find a better group with which to belong? And if so, you would have booked your spot on the White Star Line's inaugural cruise aboard the Titanic. I don't know if you're a history buff, but the Titanic never made it back. Not one thing I mentioned to you, the fine rooms, the fancy staircase, the 10-course meal, could save them from hitting an iceberg, 90% of which was below the surface, and you couldn't see it. All these passengers looked great. They were hobnobbing with the right group, but they were destined for nothing good because they couldn't see the iceberg ahead. And the lower decks began filling with 26-degree water. Those in the upper decks kept eating their fine food and listening to fine music. They were about to die and lose everyone that they loved, but they didn't know it yet. It seems a fitting metaphor for Christianity in America. Focusing on everything but what actually determines our direction. Comparing ourselves to others, finding our social location, but having no true barometer of where we stand or where we're heading. I want to try something for you here. I know you all saw these stacked up and you thought somebody forgot to clean up. So imagine that you're on an Amtrak train and it's early in the morning and you're riding and you're on the train and you're trying to get to know some people around you because that tends to be how we feel better about ourselves. And so we look to the person standing over here and we say, hey, tell me, what's going on with you? What are you doing? What's your day been like? Well, let me tell you what my day's been like yesterday. I got up and I had some breakfast. Then I knocked over the Piggly Wiggly. Then it was time for lunch. So I stole a kid's lunch. Then I stole the kid, held him for ransom for a while. About that time, it was time for dinner. That was my day yesterday. Now, when I listen to that, I think to myself, I am feeling pretty good about myself. Besides breakfast and lunch, I've never done any of that. I've never knocked over a Piggly Wiggly. I've never stolen a kid's lunch. Well, not recently. And I have never stolen a kid. I feel good about myself, and now I know I'm going to face the day feeling really great. Now, ma'am, tell me about your day yesterday. Oh, listen, I had to catch the red eye because we were just coming back from our 3 weeks serving the leper colony. And I'll tell you what, it was great, but I really missed more than anything the 15 children at the orphanage that I volunteer at on the weekends. I just wish my husband was home from his Red Cross trip so he could be part of all of this too. Now suddenly I am not feeling so good about myself. And why? Because I've never done any of that. And I keep comparing myself by the folks on this side, I feel good. I compare myself by the people on this side, I feel awful. And I'm not sure what to do with myself. Should I be led by my pride that I'm better or by my fear and my loathing and my guilt that I haven't done this yet? What if we change the whole approach? What if instead of figuring out who we are by who's on our left and who's on our right, what if we change from a bounded set to what's called a circled set? You put Jesus Christ in the middle. It no longer matters who's on the left or the right. It no longer matters what more or less has been done. My determination of who I am is what's going on between me and Christ. How much more like Christ do I look today than I did yesterday? How much more like Christ do I remind people of than I did the day before? My determination is no longer on a line. If there is a line, the line is between my heart and the heart of Christ. This is a different way of finding my identity. Can I tell you? Everything else is an iceberg. And church history is the history of icebergs. Over and over again, we know who we are, not by the 90% of things we have in common, but by the 10% that makes me different. And I know who I am because of who I'm not, or what I haven't done, or what I have done, or what my people do, instead of figuring out what it means to define myself in terms of my relationship to Christ. Why is it that the best people we know are religious and the worst people we know are religious? Because religion refers to how we define ourselves. But I'm telling you, whether it's pride or fear or groupthink or self-centeredness, these are icebergs. There's got to be a better way. There is, and it's very, very simple. we must stop focusing and defining by ourselves. We must trust Christ as the captain of the ship. You may have noticed that on our typical red banner that we have back here, or on our YouTube page, we've chosen a slogan from Scripture for this church, and the slogan being, Christ is all. That comes from Colossians chapter 3. You may remember the verse. Jesus says, here, there is neither slave nor free, Scythian. Instead, Christ is all and in all. We want every member, every visitor, every person who hears any sermon or attends any Bible class or reads anything we produce to know that what motivates us is Christ. Christ. Christ is all. We have a sign out front of our building, and the sign says, Church of Christ. I love that sign. And I think that when you hear that phrase, I think sometimes that phrase is meant to mean this church belongs to who? Christ. But I'd like to think that in addition to that, we imagine a different question that we're answering. This is a church where everything is centered around, looks like, and is inspired by a desire to be just like who? That's what we mean. What if the center of our life was this? I follow King Jesus. He is the captain of the ship. I don't determine who's on board. I don't make it my mission to count the occupants. I don't define who I am by which deck I live on. I don't find my identity in the proper dining courses or how many good things I've done or how many bad things I haven't done. I know I'm on the ship because the captain has called me. And I allow the Spirit of God to change me every day in every way into the kind of person who's ruled by the King. There's no doubt that God cares deeply about knowledge and getting things right. In Hosea, God says, my people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. I teach at a university. I believe in knowledge. But when Paul listed the fruit of the Spirit, here's how you know someone is being led by God's Spirit. He names a bunch of things, and knowledge doesn't even make the list. Why is that? Because Paul says in 1 Corinthians, knowledge which is good and right can puff up. But love always builds up. Paul lists a way of living, a way of being that doesn't bring attention to you. In fact, it involves emptying you, of what's peculiar to you, so you can be filled with what is always true about God. What if discipleship is less about what I've got right or done right, and it's more about who I've become, especially when no one is looking? Dallas Willard has a really interesting line. He says, we tend to think of our role in life as getting to heaven. But what if we thought, at least from the other perspective, what God's wanting is to get more of heaven into you? That we might live the kind of life that says, here's what it looks like to belong to Jesus Christ. How to become the kind of people who live the life of eternity in our everyday lives, full of joy and peace that comes from letting go. In 1 Samuel chapter 1 and chapter 2, Samuel presents us with two ways, you might say, of being Christian. Here's the first way. We'll call it the Hannah way. When you start to read 1 Samuel chapter 1, you get the impression that Hannah wants one and only one thing. She wants a son. I thought that most of my life reading that story, but that's not right. She actually wants something more. She wants God to be glorified. She says, if you give me a child, I'll give him back to you. I'll dedicate him to you forever. It's like Abraham wielding the knife. I want a son, but I want something even more. I want you, God, to have your way. Total devotion to the one. That's the first way. There's a second way to be Christian, so to speak. And that's represented in chapter 2 by Eli's worthless sons. I'm not trying to be mean. That's the title in my ESV Bible, Eli's worthless sons. These boys were raised in the temple too, but they couldn't be any more different than Samuel. Samuel waited to hear the voice of the Lord. That's the voice he's listening for. Eli's two boys, they were in the family business. They held positions of influence, and they came to think of themselves as a pretty big deal. So they began to abuse their position. They listened to all the people saying, "Oh, look at you. Look at the clothes you're wearing. Look at the position you have. You must be important." And they thought they were. And they got to where they didn't care anymore, and they even stole the sacrificial meat, the meat dedicated to God, and kept it for themselves to eat. A tale of two kinds of being temple livers or church dwellers. You know, going to church doesn't make you a disciple any more than standing in the garage makes you a car, or going to McDonald's makes you a Happy Meal. You know the lines. And if you are all about total devotion, nothing in my hands I bring, only to thy cross I cling, you can hear the voice of the Lord. But if your temple dwelling is about pride or fear or self-importance or what's in it for me, then we're simply heading straight on for an iceberg. Thinking that discipleship is about choosing right things, right people, masks the deeper reality. It seems to me that the choice is between me and Christ as being captain of my ship. Discipleship is simply selfless, not thinking less of yourself, but thinking of yourself less. When you're ready to quit focusing on you, what you've done, what you've got right, how many things you're going to do right, and you're ready to focus on someone other than you, then we'll talk about what discipleship really is. Discipleship begins with attitude and spiritual fruit. Two men went up to the temple to pray. One a Pharisee, the other a tax collector. The Pharisee standing by himself. Boy, isn't that an important aside. Prays this way: God, I thank you that I'm not like other men, extortioners, unjust, adulterers, or even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week. I give tithes of all that I get, identified by the right things I do. I fast twice a week. I give tithes of all that I get, identified by the wrong things I don't do. Extortion and adultery, identified by the right group. I'm a Pharisee after all. Identified by avoiding the wrong groups. I thank you that I'm not like this tax collector. But the tax collector, standing far off, would not even lift up his eyes to heaven, but beat his breast, saying, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. I tell you, this man went to his house justified rather than the other. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, but the one who humbles himself will be exalted. Do you remember how Jesus began this parable? Why Jesus told this parable in the first place? He told this parable, says Luke, to some who trusted in themselves that they were righteous and treated others with contempt. We have a choice. Who is going to be the captain of our ship? You can't look left and you can't look right to figure out that answer. There are the self-righteous, and then there are those who empty themselves so God can fill them. This is the goal. Empty ourselves, be less, so that the Spirit can do more and God can be all in all. This is what Jesus means when he says, lay down your life, take up your cross. What a contrast. To come to church if it's convenient, give a percentage of your money to keep the lights on, pray before you eat your meals. Otherwise, just sit back and enjoy your cultural Christianity. I'm telling you, there's an iceberg that awaits. America is filled with neurotic, achievement-based, self-absorbed Christians. But if their idea of following Jesus is having the right checklist, doing less bad things than their neighbor, or looking down their nose at others, then hear me when I say there are some saved who need to be saved. It looks to me like they're trying to save themselves. Baptism is not the finish line, it's the starting line. It's where we say to God, I'm ready for you to have your way. Our choosing should be more than a cold day when I went under the water and more about my daily decision. I choose Jesus more and more every day in every way. You know, the book of Acts describes Christianity less as a one-time decision and more often as a journey. Do you remember Luke's favorite word for Christianity in the book of Acts? He calls it the way. If I asked you, where are you on your journey? I hope you don't show me your baptismal certificate or your membership name. I hope you show me the cross that you've chosen for today. Baptism is not the finish line. It's the starting line. And then we go through stages of growth. Stage 0 is spiritual death. So we get baptized. We say, I don't believe in God. I'm a good person, so I'm okay. Religion is just bad for everybody. When we get over that, we can get to stage 1. Stage 1 is a spiritual infant. That's somebody who's baptized and learning, but needs attention and care and feeding. You might hear someone in this stage say something like, I don't have to go to church to be a Christian. My church is the woods. As long as I'm feeling good about things, who cares about anything else? A spiritual infant. Stage 2 is a spiritual child. This is someone who's attuned to getting their own way, easily offended. They've been in the family gatherings for a long time, but maybe just a little growth in the Lord. You might have them say something like, I love my small group, but let's not get any more people in our small group because I love the size it is. I didn't like worship today. If they would only start doing X or stop doing Y, then I'd be happy. I've heard sometimes some even say I'm not getting fed with the sermons. I'm just glad that never happens here. Notice, me. Who can't get fed by themselves? Children. Stage 3, spiritual young adults. They're good at serving. They're learning some spiritual giftings. They're great at helping spiritual infants, but they still need a spiritual parent. I love my small group, but where are the others who need this? I'm going to start one of my own so people can be added to what we're doing. Look how many came to church today. I had to park way out on the end because there were so many people at church today. Isn't that great? Steve and Rachel are in our small group, and they have the flu. I need to call our group to see if anyone made meals for them. I noticed that we don't have a ministry for single moms. I'd like to get involved and help start one. All positive. But believe it or not, this is still not the highest goal because this is serving, which is great, but it's still not ready to be a leader. And so the last stage would be spiritual parents. Maybe the goal of every Jesus follower, completely sold out to Jesus as a way of life, where we become the kind of people who are helping others become mature and become fellow partners in the gospel, and we love growing fruit on other people's trees. You might hear someone say, discipleship happens at work and at home. Will you hold me accountable to spending time discipling my children? Here's my checkbook. Am I handling my money as God would want me to? What else can I give up so that others can see Jesus in me? In 1964, Ronald Reagan was still an actor. It had been 24 years since his famous line, just win one, you know the rest of it? For the Gipper. But Reagan was becoming interested in politics. And just 3 days after the release of his movie, The Killers, co-starring Lee Marvin and Angie Dickinson, Reagan gave a speech in support of Barry Goldwater called A Time for Choosing, and that's where I got the title for the sermon. You may remember the speech for some of its memorable lines. He said, "You and I have a rendezvous with destiny." But my favorite line is this one. "You and I are told increasingly we have to choose between a left or a right. Well, I'd like to suggest there is no such thing as a left or right. There's only an up or down." We've been led to think that our baptism was our time of choosing, and we ought to choose the correct list of I's. That's how we know we are. That's how we know where we're going. That's how we know what we're doing. But Jesus says every day is a time for choosing. And the way to make that choice is to look up, to pick up our cross, to choose Jesus over ourselves, to choose Jesus as the one to reorient our lives, to choose to identify ourselves by how much we look like Jesus. For he's the only one who can steer the ship away from the icebergs that we create for ourselves. Today, I'm choosing Jesus. Are you choosing Jesus or are you choosing yourself? If it's the latter, then everything about us is simply Instagrams on the Titanic. For the things that we put out there or identify ourselves by are the things we will lose. But if we're willing to give up our lives for the sake of the gospel, Christ will give it back to us tenfold. We need Jesus to be saved. And I do believe that there are times in life when even those who have said yes to Christ need to say yes to him again and again and again. Thank you for joining us. I hope you've been encouraged. I hope you've been enriched. And if you have any questions, any thoughts, any comments, reach out to us at prayers@wschurch.net. God bless you. Tune in next week.